Hello and welcome to the Days of Learning podcast. I'm your host, David Nelson, and this is the show where we discuss health, wellness, medicine, and community engagement. Our show is brought to you by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Wisconsin Department of Health, Milwaukee County Organizations Promoting Prevention, and of course, my employer, the Medical College of Wisconsin. I'm excited to have this guest today. I've known Maxwell Roy for a number of years. In fact, he was a student of mine where he got his MPH. But Max is an interesting guy, and I really wanted him to come on the show to talk about child development and the things that he sees in working through the Boys and Girls Club. Maxwell, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here today.
Right on. Let me tell our audience a little bit about you. Maxwell is from Fredonia, Wisconsin, and he spent his undergraduate years at Ripon College. While there, he volunteered at the Boys and Girls Club, and also during that time, he became a McNair's Scholar. It was there where he did some work in Madison. He met his wife, and they had their son, Xavier. He graduated in May of 2014 from Ripon, where he also started his master's degree of Masters of Public Health at the Medical College of Wisconsin. And it was during that time that he switched his focus from obesity prevention to mental health. Max was able to work with the Washington Ozaukee Health Department to cultivate a community-based approach to improving mental health outcomes and decreasing stigma. Once he graduated, he thought the next step was more of a public health organization role, but he became the director of operations at the Boys and Girls Club, and he's been working there ever since. He continues to think about mental health, but he also adds other things to his resume. He is currently participating in a program through the Boys and Girls of America that will potentially make him a future CEO. He's doing some executive level training that includes doing so with 25 other staff from around the country. Max has had many influences on his life, and he has developed a unique set of skills and abilities. But he believes that his life mission is to improve the overall quality of life of youth and families, and we're going to talk about that today. And as he quotes Frederick Douglass, it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. When you build strong children, you build a strong adult. When you build a strong adult, you build a strong community. Max, tell us about your journey from kid in Fredonia, Wisconsin, to potentially becoming an executive at the Boys and Girls Club.
You know, it's interesting. What I always tell people was I didn't have anything like Boys and Girls Club where I grew up. I grew out in the country, so a lot of my time was spent with my brother at home. We had some pretty fun toys, go-karts, we had a pool in the backyard, so it wasn't so bad living out there, but there wasn't the social recreation that you would see at a Boys and Girls Club. And two, being a small town, I think in the 90s there was if I did go into town, me and my friends, we'd run the streets, get on our bikes, have a good time. Really didn't get into any trouble. There really wasn't much trouble to be had in the small town at that time. So I grew up there. Interesting that I grew up in Fredonia, could see Ozaukee High School football lights from my backyard, but they shipped me 7 miles up the road to Random Lake. But I'm very grateful for that. You don't know what life would have been otherwise, but I know that my upbringing has ultimately led me to where I am now. So I got to high school, graduated from Random Lake High School, had a lot of interesting experiences while I was in school. I was obese as a child, so touching on the obesity research that I was interested in, a lot of it stemmed from my own experience, and I wanted to help kids essentially not have to fight the same battles I had to, whether it be the physical to the mental, social side of it, the bullying, the names, whatever it might be. Um, but interesting enough, my brother was a big time power lifter, and he got me into that, and that helped me overcome a lot of challenges that I did face. Um, yeah, so I was at Random Lake, graduated, made it to Ripon College, and I think I changed my major 3, 4 times, but it was in my junior year, or no, my sophomore year. Apologies, my sophomore year when I realized that I think there's a different focus to where I want to take my life. It was also during my sophomore year. I just had a lot of, honestly, a lot of revelations about who I was, where I wanted to go, who I wanted to be. For a lot of time, I mentioned my brother before. I kind of followed in my brother's footsteps, almost in everything. And I finally started realizing this individualism in my sophomore year of college, and started realizing that I need to really drive my own path. And so I began that process. And I think that the moment that really made it click for me was, and you mentioned in the intro there, I volunteered at the Boys and Girls Club in Berlin, Wisconsin. I was in a fraternity, Phi Kappa Pi, and we did a lot of community engagement. We did a fundraiser every year. We'd identify a family that was affected by leukemia. We do a lot of fundraising that culminated in an ultimate Frisbee tournament, and we'd raise funds for them. And so I was at the time focusing on education, and I wanted to go and be a teacher. When I went to this Boys and Girls Club, though, there was just this moment where I realized that there was so much freedom to a point that as a staff there, they could really make it their own. These staff that came from all different walks of life, that had different interests, different hobbies, different passions, they were able to uniquely give back to those kids based on their own life experience. And I was like, this is it. This is where I want to be. And it wasn't maybe necessarily boys and girls clubs, but it just so happened after I graduated college, that's where I found myself.
You
So
know, I
journey,
want to go back a little bit. I'm
yeah,
going to have you go back a little bit, because you have a theme here. You had mentioned small town, and then your brother, and
yep.
teacher and community. Take us back to this idea of how a small town shaped you to be the person you are now.
That's a very interesting question. So when I reflect back, I don't live in a small town. I live in Wauwatosa. My wife and I live here now. The interesting thing about where I'm from was everyone looked like you. Everyone essentially held the same belief systems. Basically everyone was some version of Christian, whether it be Catholic, Lutheran, non-denominational. For the most part, everyone held the same political beliefs. There really wasn't too much differentiation between a lot of the folks that lived there. Not to say that there wasn't, but it was very, very similar amongst everyone that lived in the community. But my whole life growing up, I always felt this difference, right? I always felt that not that I didn't belong, but I always felt like I was going against the grain, that I kind of challenged some of the ideas and the belief systems there. And so, in the way that there was so much commonality in the community, which really made a beautiful sense of community. I mean, the tight knit nature of the community I lived in was a really beautiful thing. And I always wanted that no matter where I went. But as I, began to grow up, I was like, I don't necessarily hold some of the same beliefs. And, there was pressure there. There was pushback there. There was opinions and statements made about maybe the way I felt or thought that wasn't exactly agreeable with the area. But, I was still accepted. I wasn't by any means, harassed or treated as an outsider. So it's interesting. So I guess what I'm getting at is I grew up in a community that was so tight knit. It felt like there was this beautiful sense of community. But at the same end, because it was so, I don't want to say narrow, but I guess narrow in scope of beliefs and all that, I was like, there's just way more. There's so much more. There's different viewpoints. There's different perspectives. There's different people from different cultures, different walks of life. And I wanted to experience that. And now I went to Ripon College, which was a school of 1,000 kids. So it's not like I really upgraded myself to this place that had a rich diversity. But at the same time, it had enough for me to learn more. And I got to meet a lot of people that came from, different cities, different countries, different cultural backgrounds. And I really, really immersed myself into getting to know these people and getting to understand what's different, and like why do you believe what you believe. So in that small town, again, I learned a lot about commonality and community, but also from the lack of diversity, it made me seek out diversity. It made me seek out different viewpoints and different ways of thinking and different frameworks that we kind of live life by. So hopefully that kind of answers your question. But yeah, the small town in what it did and what it did not really did shape kind of where I am now.
You talked about the tight knitness, and I can see that in you, in knowing you as who you are. You also mentioned this idea of someone who grew up with obesity personally. What influence did that have on your life?
Man, it led, and it took me a long time to realize it, but I think the most important thing, or most heavy weighing thing, was really the mental health impact that it had on me. I really had no self-confidence. My self-worth was pretty terrible. I was my harshest critic, and I was my worst enemy. Um, and so and I didn't really realize it at the time. Nothing really kind of clicked because every time I went to a conference, the teachers would say nothing but great things about it's a pleasure to have Max in class. He's a good kid. He's a good student. And so I felt one way on the inside where I felt I didn't feel great at all. But yet all these people were saying all these good things about, me and all this. So it never really hit me that hard, I think, as a child. It wasn't until sometime later that I started to realize, like, oh, this isn't normal. Because I started to get educated, started to realize kind of the what mental health really was. But yeah, so obesity, I think that was the kind of the biggest factor, was the mental health. But yet again, it's interesting because I didn't really notice it. But then too, like I think I mentioned before, there was bullying, there was just people, the way they would treat me because I was obese. But then too, back to like the mental health and kind of the personal health, the way I treated myself, it wasn't very kind. And so it was a interesting combination of a lot of factors that influenced me. But then I kind of talked about before, the powerlifting thing. That was probably one of the best things that happened to me, because I always tell people I entered high school at 220 pounds and I left high school at 220 pounds, and it was the exact opposite of what I came in. And that was probably one of the best things, because it taught me discipline. It taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about myself and what I could accomplish. And so that was a really great thing for me. And so even though I wasn't exactly taking care of myself mentally and aware of myself, the obesity kind of led me through a lot of interesting scenarios that allowed me to learn a lot about myself.
So maybe we should call it empower lifting instead of just powerlifting.
Exactly.
You said something, Max, that I wanna touch on, and I want to have you comment on. You spoke of the external factors that people were giving you, good student, pleasure to have in class, positive things that make us feel good. But on the inside, you felt something different. What was that like how old were you at this time?
Well, I think when it really started, when I started noticing, how big I was, it was probably fourth grade. I'll never forget it. It was
Okay.
one of my first days of school in fourth grade. And I went shopping with my mom and my grandma, and I got this really cool red Adidas shirt, and I absolutely loved it. And I remember trying it on, and it fit. But that first day of school, that thing didn't fit. And I went to school, and I was just self-conscious the entire day. Um, and so that's kind of when I first felt it, but I kind of suppressed it as often as I could. But man, it really ate me up inside. And for a long time, it's done that.
Yeah, so here you are at 9 or 10 and having to put, real feelings and emotions to something that frankly, most 9 and 10-year-olds don't have a clue as to what this is about because developmentally, they're just not able to do so. Talk about that in relation to your transition as a volunteer to becoming an employee of Boys and Girls Club.
Yeah. So I kind of mentioned it when I was at that Berlin club. I saw people able to give back in a way that was really personalized. And when I look back, in one of the driving factors as to why I've always, why I was drawn to the Boys and Girls Club and why I still am there today is because I'm able to make a difference in the lives of youth that I wasn't able to make for myself. Part of the issue was I didn't speak up for myself. I didn't let anybody know how I felt. But that's the reality, is that today's youth, there are so many of them that are just crying for help, but they're not saying anything. On the inside, they are torn up. They are just, they're full of, unfortunately, self-hate, self-loathing. Their confidence is at an all-time low. But externally, they just don't show it, won't show it. But I knew I couldn't be the only one. And so again, that driving force of knowing that I can help kids the way I wish someone would have helped me, and knowing that I didn't get the help because I didn't seek the help. I didn't ask for the help. And I know that there's so many kids like that.
So you could really empathize with the children that suddenly you're in charge of, and for saying that once you start to see things, you can't not see them. What did you see in some of these young boys and girls?
So I started off at the Kewaskum Boys and Girls Club, and I will never forget that experience. Um, there were so many great kids, all different backgrounds, low income to high income, have everything, don't have anything. Both parents, single parent, grandparents, you name it. But what I saw when I got there was similar to what I had in myself. I saw plenty of kids that were externally, they seemed okay, but there were these cues in their behavior that told me on the inside that wasn't the case. And whether it be, moderate to severe, every child had an opportunity to grow into something more that they wanted to be. Even that child that was probably, they seemed to be just fine. They had all friends. They were the smart kid in the class. They all seemed to want, or some of them seemed to want, but all of them seemed to accept the idea of someone being there to support them, help them, and get them to where they wanted to be. They just needed somebody to help challenge them to really think about, where is it that I am and where is it that I want to go. So being able to offer that was something amazing, and I saw that in every child. I think that's, no matter what way you spin it, I think we as human beings just love growth. We love challenge, but we want to have purpose and drive towards it.
Can you give us an example of one that might come to mind, a child like that? Describe that
Oh
child.
yes. Oh, my buddy. Obviously I'll leave names out of it, but and I hope he listens to this podcast because he'll know exactly who I'm talking about. This boy in particular, it breaks my heart to think about what this child experienced from probably the moment he was born. I don't know the full story, but I know enough to know that parents were in and out of jail. There was a lot of drugs and alcohol involved. There was dealing of things involved. Um, he was angry. He was confused. He wanted to be such a good kid, and he tried so hard, but yet he always found himself getting in trouble. Um, there's so many kids, and he was a really good example of, he wanted to do so much good, but he wanted attention, and he really only understood getting attention through negative behavioral patterns, because that's what he saw at home. He never really saw anything positive. Um, and in the worst of ways, there was attention given because of very negative behaviors being happened at home. Um, so I saw that, and he was, man, he was my project year one. I saw him, and I'm like, yep, you're gonna be on my hip by the end of this year, and I'm gonna take you from that child that I'm talking to in the office every day to the child that's helping out every day. And the first 9 months of that project was, oh man, that was difficult. The amount of times I had to send him home, the amount of times he was on a couple of days suspension, the amount of times just the conversations with him, grandma, grandpa, the school, everybody. It was just it was a lot. But I tell you, after 9 months, something clicked. When he finally started to get the sense that I think I can trust this guy. I think he actually cares about me, because every time he would misbehave, it would get me to be like, okay, what's going on? Where are we at? How are you? How can I support you? Just let's just talk, and let's think about what we're doing, how we're doing it, where we're going. Um, yeah, and it's amazing to see, because that would have been 2014. This boy now, and he's had a heck of a life since. And there was a couple of years where, I'll put it this way, I lost him due to some things that happened in his life. Um, I will add, there was a little amazing time where all of a sudden, after about 2 years, I hadn't heard from him. I get a call from the Boys and Girls Club in Appleton saying, "Hey, we have someone here that wants to talk to you." And no kidding, it's him. And he's like, "Hey, I just wanted to call you. I just want to let you know I'm doing well." I'll never forget. He told me, he's like, "I haven't gotten into a fight for almost a month." And I was so proud of him. I'm like, "Dude, a month? Like, I couldn't remember you going 3 days without getting into a fight." It was amazing. It was beautiful. And then unfortunately, there was some time again where just lost track of him due to the nature of the systems that be. But now he's back, and he's back in Kewaskum. And I got to spend some time. I got to spend I kept him out of class for about an hour and a half. It was only supposed to be a 20-minute visit, and turned into an hour and a half, and he missed a couple classes. But it was just amazing to catch up and talk to him and see how he had goals. And he not only did he have goals, but he had steps of how he planned to get there. They weren't just, it wasn't a reach goal. It was a very realistic goal with very realistic steps. And he told me, "This is because of your influence on me, because you saw me, even though I didn't ask for help. You reached out to me and pulled me from whatever depths he was in to want to be something, not to be something more, but to be what he wanted to be. He just needed that assistance. He needed that support." And just like how I wish I could have had somebody back when I was a kid do that for me to that degree, I was able to give that to him. And it's a success story in the making. And I think this year is his, he's going to be graduating from high school in a couple of years. I can't wait to see what this kid turns into, because he's just on the right path. And being able to do that for one child is as fulfilling as it gets. And but knowing that I'm able to make that impact every day on hundreds of youth is an amazing feeling. But he's my story of why I think it's why Boys and Girls Club has been a beautiful thing.
It's that consistent support that provides the foundation for people to move forward as they see it. Talk about the philosophy of the club. Tell us, for those listeners who did not grow up in a Boys and Girls Club. I didn't grow up in a Boys and Girls Club. I've worked with them, but I've never been really a part of the programmatic end of it. Talk about that, Max.
So the mission of the Boys and Girls Club, I'll start with that. I think that's a good place to probably to go. It's to enable all young people, especially those who need us most, to reach their full potential as caring, productive citizens. So that's step one. That's the mission. That's where we're going. That's, at the end of the day, all the work is going to ensure that that statement is happening. And so we do it through a variety of ways. But the focus is providing a top-notch club experience each and every day. I always say it to my team, and I live by this for the Boys and Girls Club, is the first priority is that it has to be safe and it has to be positive. If kids don't feel safe, there's no way we're going to get them to learn and grow. And if it's not positive, then, well, honestly, what are we doing here? If it's not a positive space for them to develop, we're just kind of, we're not doing our jobs. And then the other piece is it's inclusive, right? It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter the color of your skin, what religion you pray to. it is for every child. But it's interesting, right? So in the mission, it says especially those who need us most, because we recognize that not every child has the same playing field. Some kids start a little bit ahead of others, and some are just, man, they're climbing an icy hill just to get to the same level as some of these other kids, or to even have a chance to reach the same outcomes as some of these other kids. So at the end of the day, we understand that it's for all kids, but we're going to make sure that the programming and activities target all kids, but we're going to make sure that there's very specific programming that helps to make sure that those kids that have those disadvantages, that have those lack of opportunities, that we're going to be able to provide them for them. And we do it in a variety of ways through programming. So we have a very unique approach where nationally there's the core program areas would be academic success. So what can we do to help kids with their homework? And what can we do to help kids navigate, elementary school to middle school to high school to either four-year degree, associates, technical college, whatever that is, or just career. Where are you going? Like, what are you going to do for a job for the rest of your life? That's key to a successful, successfully achieving the mission. The other area is character and leadership, because we understand that these kids need to have a character that allows them to be caring, productive, and good citizens. And then leadership, I think, we've talked about leadership quite a bit. And I think it's important. One of the philosophies that I live my life by is that you cannot lead unless you lead yourself. You need to become the leader of your own life. And only then will you actually be able to, I think, be a leader anywhere else. That's something I work on every single day. And that's something I want to make sure that every kid at the Boys and Girls Club understands. So leadership, I think, is probably one of the most critical pieces, because if you don't have leadership of your own life, you're not going to be able to lead yourself to develop the character that you want. You're not going to be able to lead yourself to achieve the academics you want. And then the third core program area nationally is healthy lifestyles. So, what in healthy lifestyles, obviously health is a very, very large thing. So there's, physical health, mental health, social health, all of it, nutrition. We want to make sure that these kids understand everything from what does a healthy diet look like, alternative healthy snacks, how to make them, how to read a nutrition label, physical fitness, what does it mean to get 60 minutes a day, and what can I do, from an athletic standpoint, so offering things like, basketball leagues, volleyball leagues, etc., to what are some social recreation type physical activities that you can do now and probably for the rest of your life. So we want to make sure that in all these areas that we are meeting kids now and for their future. It's got to be the whole picture. That's where I think I look at logic model framework, right? And we think, what is the long-term outcome? And we're not going to see that at the Boys and Girls Club while they're there, but that's what we want. So we're going to work back and make sure that our programming fits kind of that model of what can we do to create the condition of a successful life in those areas.
You mentioned leadership and the idea of leading yourself before you can lead others. Because of the variability that you have in children as well as staff, talk about how that translates from your idea of setting goals and thinking about the whole person to the staff that you lead, who are also ultimately going to be leading the students.
Yeah. Well, like you said, leadership, it starts with yourself. That is it's kind of interesting. It shouldn't be, I guess, a big surprise, but that saying, like, you can't love others unless you learn to love yourself. There is something to be said about that. You can't respect yourself, love yourself, lead yourself. I don't think you can effectively do that for other people. So I try to make sure that my team understands, the staff that we have, and I start with my direct reports. And I've said it time and time again, you have to take care of yourself. You can't take care of these kids, and you can't take care of your team that you have at your site unless you start with yourself. Start there. Get a good night's rest. Make sure you think about what you need to do for the day. Do some form of recap, just daily reflection, weekly reflection, whatever it is that you seem to be best, and make sure you lead yourself. But we often have a lot of meetings with my direct reports. We just did another round of it, especially in COVID times. It's a unique. I think it's a little bit more unique than it's ever been. But we sit down, we talk about, okay, where have we been? How are you? How are you doing? What are our goals? What are we going to achieve? What do we want to see in 3 months, 6 months, in terms of your personal approach, your management practice, your team and how they're operating, your policies and procedures. Where would you like these to develop, and where would you like them to go? And then the club as a whole, operational goals, like how many, what kind of programming do you want to run? How many kids do you want to see every day? How many community partnerships do you want to reinforce, or how many new ones do you want to create? So there's always a focus on forward thinking. And that has such a dramatic impact on the kids, because I think once you start creating this atmosphere of leadership, and it's leadership at all levels. I might be the director of operations, but that doesn't make my unit director any less than me. They're just as vital, if not as, if not more vital, because at the end of the day, they're the one at the club overseeing the staff with the kids. I'm just fortunate that I'm able to be in a position that allows me to probably be a little bit more, how I see it, as I have more of the 30,000 foot view. They're more at the 20,000 foot view, and then those staff, they're there with the kids. There's leadership that's necessary at every level, because the reality is I might get smacked by a bus tonight, and these staff of ours got to be able to operate tomorrow, regardless of what happens. But when you really drive leadership, you start to see those outcomes achieved. You start to see those goals achieved, because they start understanding the leadership, or the discipline that it takes to do effective leadership. And when you start to do all that, there are kids that really do respond to that. And we actually have very specific programming, like I mentioned, for leadership. Specifically, the top two are Keystone, which is a teen program focused on character and leadership, and there's Torch Club, which is basically the late elementary, middle school version of it. And you get to provide these kids opportunities, and you start to see, like, kids really do want to set goals, achieve highly, and just be successful. They just need to have avenues to do it. And so if I can create a sense of leadership culture with my team, and they can do that with their team, and their staff can do it with the kids, you just start to see this dynamic efficiency be created, where everyone's starting to learn about leadership and practice leadership and learn.
It sounds like you expect a lot from your staff. How has that been received over the years?
Oh, yes. I actually remember a time with the staff probably about a year and a half ago. She was probably about 3 months into the job. Now she had been working with us for some time before that. And she sat down and she's like, "You really have high expectations." And I said, "Yeah, because these kids deserve that. These kids deserve nothing but our absolute best." And I'm not saying you have to put in 80 hours a week to achieve that success. But in my book, like, when you're here for the mission of the Boys and Girls Club, and I guess for me, take away, whether it's Boys and Girls Club, whether it's YMCA, I think when you're in a mission-driven culture, standards have to be high. We have donor dollars. It's not like we're flipping hamburgers or selling some product. We have a duty to the dollars we have to ensure that we are doing the best with what we have. And especially when I think about the kids, and I think about what they mean for our future as a community, as a nation, you can't shortchange them. And so that mindset goes to the staff. And so no question that there's been resistance, pushback, like, "Hey, like, this is a lot." And I'm like, "Well, I understand. And so what can we do? How can I support you to achieve this? What infrastructure can we put in place to help you get there?" So we've looked at a variety of things. One thing, in more recent time, was program coordinators at our sites, because I was a unit director from 2014 to 2018, and it was a lot of work. You wore every hat, and it was basically you, and you had part-time staff, and you just kind of hope that you had at least one that was able to be your right hand without really getting the title or the pay of a right hand. And so that was one of those pieces where it's like, okay, it's not going to get any easier. The more we progress, and kind of to your point, I see a lot of opportunity to grow this organization. So I'm not gonna put any less, I guess, on the plate of the unit as a whole. So that means this unit director is going to have more work unless I can provide them more efficient means to do their work, or provide them more infrastructure whether that be through, especially through let's get you an official second hand that can help drive some progress and drive some outcomes. And so we're able to actually, so for our Hartford Boys and Girls Club, we just expanded. Now we have 2 elementary sites, and so I got to go ahead to basically pilot these positions, and so I feel like it's going to be successful. I think we have a good plan in place, and I think I'm going to be able to show the organization why it's necessary, and that return on investment. Because, like I said, this mission is priceless. It needs to be handled with care, and there needs to be high standards around it. You can't always count on just one person to do it. There needs to be a little bit more, and so I'm pretty excited to see what happens there, so we can continue to grow the organization more and more.
Well, we can endure a lot of the what when we know the why. And so if you're telling them why they need to do something for the sake of both the programming and for the children who you said deserve it, then people tend to gravitate towards that. And if not, it's certainly okay. So you've been there about 10 years now. And what's changed in the time since you started at Boys and Girls Club?
So I thought about that before, and I kind of want to break it down into 2 different lenses. So one is the national lens of the Boys and Girls Club, and then I'll talk about the local. So I'll start off with the national lens, and I want to highlight a Milwaukee guy, Jim Clark. He's been leading the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. I forget the exact year, but I know he got the national president role a few years before I got into the movement. He was the president CEO of the Milwaukee clubs for a number of years, and really did some amazing things. And you hear about the Jim Clark days, and it's just really inspiring to hear about it. But since I got into the Boys and Girls Clubs nationally, it was interesting because there was this weird sense, at least at our club and other clubs that I associated with, that nationals really was out there for the metro units. A lot of the resources didn't really seem to kind of fit a lot of clubs around the country. But when Jim Clark got there, it just started every few months, every time you got more and more information from the national organization, you got the sense that, okay, there are tides turning, and there's really some drive to really enhance the national brand, so that way it can also enhance the local clubs. And so just in the years I've been there, the amount of resources that are available in terms of training, being able to send our staff, myself, to trainings that are honestly, they're top notch. They're fantastic trainings. They've spent a lot of time putting resources into making sure that there's just high quality training, from whether it be fund development, forward engagement, management, you name it. Every aspect of the club, there is high quality training available. And then partnerships, what they've been able to do, partnerships on a national level, and how that then trickles into the local level, has been absolutely amazing. Like I said, just in the last 4 years, it's honestly a significant difference that has benefited the Boys and Girls Club. And so I know I'm speaking from a shorter time frame, so I'm sure there's others that could say of the progress maybe even prior, but man, just in my years, the dramatic positive impact from the national organization has been really something to see. And then obviously that relates down to the local level. But local, for us at the Boys and Girls Club, when I first got there, it was on the outside looking in, this idea of we probably need to do a little bit more from a social, emotional, mental, behavioral health side of things, but it really wasn't pressing, at least with our organization. And I think we're kind of fortunate in Washington County where we're at, where it's not as the needs aren't as high as maybe some areas around. There's a lot of good resources in that county, but no question, just in the short few years to start, I saw a shift in more and more kids having just social, emotional, mental, behavioral health problems. It became more difficult for my staff to be able to kind of cope and work with these kids, and that was a huge eye opener. And so we started to be like, okay, we really need to look at this and do something about this. And honestly, I guess for me, I was fortunate that I was in the Master's of Public Health program at the medical college. I had shifted my focus from obesity to mental health. And then I got engaged with the Ozaukee, Washington Health Department to be able to develop Cultivate. And kind of through all that experience, I started to see the organization, how we could bring in new policy, procedure, infrastructure, you name it, partnerships, start making a difference there. So I would say, especially since my time as director of operations, there's been a major shift in how we do that. So anything from training, we just actually got a good chunk of funding from the West Bend Hospital Foundation to basically provide what we call Zen dens in every club space. So just quiet, calming spaces for whether it be a kid that we know to have some type of behavioral mental health condition, gives them a place to go calm and find equilibrium. To that child that's just, man, they're just having a really bad day. It's not worth sending them home. It's better that we try to work with them, help them process through this, and again, find some equilibrium and get them back on track.
So what did you see in some of the children, and how were you able to express that to the leaders that you needed to do something different?
I think what it came down to is we had more and more kids that our staff just didn't know what to do. And so we were sending more kids home. We weren't able to provide them, I think, with the mentorship, with the, I guess, behavioral counseling from the staff that they really needed. And I just we can't just keep sending kids home. We can't just keep not dealing with this. And we're the Boys and Girls Club. You go back to that mission. This is a need. This is something that if it's not addressed, how can they be productive, caring, responsible citizens? So it needs to be addressed, and we have capacity to do it. So let's do it. And so I was able to have that conversation with my executive director on multiple occasions. Jay Fisher is his name, and he knew that time was coming where it's like, okay, there's things to be done, and we just have to find the right opportunities and resources to make it happen. So over the course of the years, we were able to provide, and like I said, those Zen dens. We were able to provide more enhanced training to our staff. And then we were able to also partner with PSG Professional Services Group in Washington County. They actually provide counseling to our kids, and through that grant that we got from the West Bend Hospital Foundation, we actually can provide free counseling to those youth that if they don't have Badger Care. So if they have insurance, but parents even just still financially can't afford it, we'll help them out. Or if they're underinsured, whatever that case is, if they have trouble financially affording counseling for their kids, we're going to take care of them.
What was the reaction to this idea that you had?
There wasn't, at least internally in the organization, there was a sense of welcome to it, because everyone saw that it was just it's just more and more difficult to work with some of these kids over the years. There were some unit directors that I knew that actually came before my time. I just happened to know them through some social connections. They had began to see that too, and they just knew that there was something that was needed. It just wasn't, I think at that time, there just wasn't a lot of focus on mental health, especially in youth. But as anxiety and depression began to rise in youth, and suicides began to rise in youth, and there was just more, whether it be violence in youth to all different types of behavioral outcomes, there was that turning point probably earlier in the decade where people were like, okay, mental health needs a real hard focus. And so we kind of rode that wave, and it really, I guess it was a lucky timing, but it was good timing. I guess for me to come in, identify, make some recommendations, because again, it was like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. This makes a lot of sense. Let's go ahead. And then I think externally in the community, there was no pushback, there was no resistance. There was a lot of good work being done by several different nonprofits and school districts, because I think everyone was starting to see it right at the same time, and we all kind of acted on it right around the same time too. So it was really, I don't know, it was a really beautiful thing to see happen, because everyone jumped on the ball at the same time.
It sounds like it happened here, and I think it's worth noting for those groups and people because I can hear any number of people saying, from parents, maybe not to teachers, but perhaps in an after-school programming setting, what do kids have to be anxious about? What are they depressed about? They just have to play and go to school. And suicide, what are you talking about, Max? Did you have any of that?
I think people had questions in terms of like, why do you think this is happening? And I don't think a lot of people understood. And I think even to this point, I think there's a lot of really good, there's a lot of good research out there that shows a lot of, but it's so complex. And what leads to this, right? It could be the upbringing, could be the family setting, could be, maybe a substance abuse issue at home, just parents not being connected, parents that are parents that are not really parents, and the children are really out depend on their own. But then you couple probably any of those variety of situations with the current, honestly, I look at like the technology situation, right? Um, Kids have so much access to so much, and at times I don't think these kids know how to handle it. So it could just be a breadth of information that they learn about, they see things that they definitely shouldn't be seeing at their age, the access to be able to harass and bully online and hide behind that curtain, and that effect that it has. You hear about stories of kids being put up on Snapchat, being humiliated, um, the cyberbullying. I mean, there's so many factors, right? I think for youth today, and it's overwhelming. It's so much, and I think to myself, I'm 28 years old, and I try to stay off Facebook because that's, especially now more so than ever, that stuff's overwhelming. And if you aren't mentally prepared for the wild, wild world that lives in the web, in the digital space, you are going to be affected by it, and you could be to the point where you are crippled by it. There's so many people that talk about, you see those people on vacation, and that the research that says if you start to, compare yourself to those that you see on Facebook or wherever, there's that piece. And then again, I talked about the access to information that and whatever content that kids should just not see, and they don't know what it is, but they know it's not what they're supposed to see, and no one's really talked to them about it. They don't know how to cope with it. So then it leads to a variety of like confusion and fear, and I think the responses that you see out of kids, it's so complex and vast because of the complexity of who they are and where they come from. And it's just a giant web of, it's hard to predict. But yet I can tell you right now, the amount of kids, and I saw it when I first started. I mean, I didn't really see a lot of anxiety in like really young kids, like that elementary age. But man, I do now. I think in 2014 when I started, I didn't see a whole lot of it, but it's like year after year, it's like kids just became more adult-like, right? But they didn't know how to handle it. They got more and more access to things that they didn't understand or, again, shouldn't be seeing. They don't know how to handle it, but we're not, as a community, I think, staying updated on what that access looks like, how they're behaving and engaging in that space. And so they don't know how to cope. We learn coping skills in school in terms of, someone's mean to you, how to deal with anger and sadness and things like that. But these kids weren't really being taught how to cope with just this massive amount of just influence from this digital space. And again, you couple that in with all the, I guess what you'd say, traditional influences that may cause some behavioral issues or mental health issues. It just is a recipe that we just haven't been prepared for. And so now we have so many kids, again, with anxiety, depression, suicide, and it just breaks my heart to see these kids because they're just not, they're not being kids anymore. Sometimes they don't give themselves permission, but it's like we've robbed them of the childhood experience they should have because we haven't effectively taught them how to cope with it. But again, that's where Boys and Girls Clubs and so many other nonprofit schools, you name it, can and have been stepping up to try to honestly get a control of that space and try to make sure, okay, how can we help these kids get through this? Because it's not going to change anytime soon.
You said that you try to give the children who need the most support. You know, you mentioned this idea of if it's part of its information. Um, how has this become the role of the clubs to support this filtering and this management of these complex issues?
So it's an interesting question, right? Because from a local club standpoint, you can kind of, and I think it's one of the beauties of being kind of a local organization that we're all part of this national web, but we get to individually kind of focus on the needs of our own communities. But I do think that mental health has been something that I'd be shocked to hear that there would be some clubs across the country that don't have some type of focus on this. But you know, the key is that we're able to identify needs and find a space to address them. You know, I think some clubs are fortunate that, like ours, I was able to find a strong partner in PSG and find a funder in that West Bend Hospital Foundation to get funding to drive some of these pieces at our clubs. But not every clubs are so fortunate to have that. But then on the other end, there are clubs that have just, you know, that have funding capacities available to them, or you know, they have counselors and psychologists on staff. So it kind of depends where you are and kind of your circumstances. But at the end of the day, as a Boys and Girls Club, you know, if we want that mission to succeed and we see a need in the community in terms of our youth, I do believe it's our obligation to step in to support whatever it's going to take to address that need. We just got to make sure that what we're doing kind of fits appropriately to the capacity and resources of the organization. So yeah.
You know, how do you know it's working? That makes a whole lot of sense. But how do you know that when you see these children, even for a short time, what do you notice?
Yeah, well, I can tell you right now, I'll give you a good example. So we installed a Zen Den at our West Bend Boys and Girls Club. So that would have been the summer of 2019. Last summer. The amount of kids sent home per day, the amount of suspensions, and the amount of expulsions dropped dramatically. And I can tell you right now, those kids that would traditionally have been getting sent home or expelled or suspended, those kids were in that space. You know, so that was a really good way of just kind of knowing off the bat that this one, just creating a quiet, calm space made a huge difference in the lives of this youth. And we were able to then use that obviously to teach coping skills and et cetera. You know, so then the other ways that we know, so like PSG, we look at, okay, how many kids are we referring, how many kids are successfully getting through that referral process and then participating in the counseling itself. You know, obviously we have some data that, well, I think you can probably look at too, and it's maybe not a direct tie, but again, that idea of send home, suspensions, expulsions, and how that relates to staff being able to work with these kids and provide them more skills to be able to cope. We do have some programming that we do. It's called the SMART programming, so there's SMART Moves, SMART Kids, there's some variety. And you know, some of it's very focused on like drugs and alcohol, you know, staying away from drugs and alcohol. But there's a lot of focus on mental health, social emotional health, things like that, mental health hygiene. And so we do pre and post assessments. And so we're able to literally see, okay, this child gained X amount of knowledge from their time in this program just by taking a little test. So I think the culmination of all these different, you know, factors and all these different areas of data tracking kind of shows like, okay, this stuff's working. And I think to the point of the staff, I think about how, you know, I guess we don't directly quantify it, but in my conversations with staff over the years, being able to observe and then hear from them how they're handling behaviors. You know, I'm not saying it like we're the best at it, but being able to say, I know for a fact right now, more of our staff are better prepared and equipped to handle these types of situations. And then I see less of the, I guess, more negative outcomes of those situations happening. You know, again, that culmination, I guess, of the objective and subjective data would tell us that, hey, we're doing something right here.
So what's the reaction from the community about these types of programmings?
Interesting enough, like I said, you know, there was no pushback. I think if anything, we were on a wave at a time where mental health is really starting to get to be more of a prominent thing in the community. So the feedback was always good. There was always a lot of encouragement to us, a lot of support around us, and like I said, from a funding standpoint, locally, and whether it be like West Bend Foundation to some of the more other foundations, and the county. We were able to do some pretty unique things, and people were ready to support us where we were at. And I think, again, it really has a lot to do with the timing. 15, 20 years ago, whether, not saying it's just Washington County, but maybe anywhere in America, not so sure mental health was a big thing that people wanted to support and maybe even buy into. But it was the right idea at the right time at the right place. And so it was well received. And obviously I want to continue to do more, and that's just a matter of building capacity and finding the funding. And no question, if we stay at it and keep proving ourselves that what we're doing is worth that while, it's going to come.
I want to go here and ask you about this, because this podcast is really about health and wellness and health promotion in the community. What makes for a healthy community at all ages, not just children, but across the lifespan?
Yeah, I think it comes, well, the first thing that pops in my head is leadership. You need to have people in leadership positions that are able to identify what the needs of the community are and provide the right resources and capacity to deliver on that in your community. So whether that be your school district, your health and human services department, your local, your local mayor, whatever it might be, you have to have the right people with the right leadership mindset to be able to, again, identify, develop a plan, execute that plan, and ensure that plan is working. Leadership is just, like I said, it's just core, I think, to just about anything. But outside of that, I think it's programs that are collaborative, a lot of good partnerships, being able to, again, identify those needs and make sure that those needs are being properly addressed by the right players. It wouldn't make a lot of sense for certain nonprofits. If you're I think like Casa Guadalupe in Washington County, and then if there's a mental health suicide issue going on, that would be probably more on maybe like an or maybe a different example. So like substance abuse, things like Casa Guadalupe doesn't focus on that. That's what Elevate does. So you got to make sure you got the right people who are addressing the right issue, and you don't want to have too many cooks in the kitchen, right? It's like everyone has their part. We just got to make sure that we find them the right spot on the bus to make sure that part's taken care of. It's just, I think I go back to leadership. When you have good leaders that identify the needs, they're able to help develop the right plan, the right resources, the right people, the right entity to address that issue. And that's going to help create a healthier community. It's going to help create a community that people want to be in, and it's going to create a community that can help become a beacon of hope and an example for others. I look at, healthy schools. I think school districts have a significant role to play, obviously, health and human services, nonprofits, even businesses. I think there's just a major or significant driver in aligning as much as you can in your community to the goals of the community and where it wants to go.
Max, you're talking like a CEO. And some of the things, I'd like you to talk a bit about some of the things that you've learned in this executive training that you're going through with the Boys and Girls Club. Tell us a little bit about it.
So it was a very humbling opportunity, being as young as I am. I've never felt as young as I am. I was also a dad at 21 years old, so that always made me feel like the older guy in the room compared to my buddies. But I got this opportunity, like you mentioned. There was 25 of us from around the country that got recruited to it, and they said, hey, you are internal folks in the Boys and Girls Clubs, and we believe that you possess the ability to lead organizations, whether it be a small budget to a metro club. They believed in us, and they saw the capacity for us to take that on. I've learned what I think one of the most important things I've learned is just that concept of leadership, how that will make or break anything. And I know I make plenty of mistakes every day, but a true leader makes mistakes and then learns from them. And they celebrate the successes, but they realize that you still got to get to work tomorrow. And there's no one that's going to get me out of my bed but myself. And that's one of the, that's key. But as a whole, I mean, they've taught me about everything, especially Boys and Girls Clubs. There's several different areas of focus, but I have another mentor. His name's Kevin Deary of the Elkhart County Boys and Girls Clubs. So there's really four key areas to, Boys and Girls Clubs, and you can probably say any nonprofit. First one is operations. Operations it has to have probably the top priority, because if you're not operating on the right level, doing the right things, it's kind of like, what are you doing here? Then the second piece would be fund development, second would be board development and board engagement. Gotta make sure I get that right. Because you got to be able to build effective boards. You got to be able to get the right people at the table. Jay Fisher, my executive director, has taught me so much about building an effective board, because the board that we have is I know some other folks that work in nonprofits, and we got some great people on our board, man. And I know there's some people admire what we have on our board, and I do too, because we have people that come from a variety of sectors, whether that be business to nonprofit to government to whatever it may be, and there are people that can help make moves for us. So it's not just anyone. You got to have the right people at the table when you build a board. So that training has taught me a great deal of how do you build the right board to address what it is you're trying to accomplish as a Boys and Girls Club. The third thing then would be fund development, resource development, fundraising as a whole. You can't open the doors, you can't operate unless you have the funding, and you need a good board, a strong board, to help you get the funding that you need. So this training as well has taught me a lot about anything from individual one-on-one donations to how the idea of an annual campaign, corporate fundraising, kind of the whole gambit of fundraising. And then the fourth piece is community engagement, which, when you think about it, when you have solid operations, when you have a very diverse and engaged board, and when you do solid fundraising, kind of community engagement happens already if you're doing those other three very well. But community engagement is obviously key, because you have to be a part of your community. And I think one of the most important things us as a Boys and Girls Club can do is we can be the voice for youth, and we should be the experts. When the county wants to say, hey, we want to try to improve something for youth, the Boys and Girls Club is at the table. That should be the goal of every Boys and Girls Clubs in this country, is that when any community, county, whatever it is, state, nation, is talking about what are we going to do for the youth, the Boys and Girls Club should be at that table. And if you're not, then you better start working to get yourself there. Because I think that is, again, if we're the Boys and Girls Club, I mean, literally, Boys and Girls Club, if we're not at the table for something that affects the boys and girls in our community, I don't think we're doing the right thing. Or we're not doing it to the best of our abilities. There's a kind of a spectrum there of kind of where you might be.
You didn't even look at your notes there, but I know some of our listeners will gravitate towards this idea of the operations, the board development, the resource development, and the community engagement as a way to run their nonprofit. Quite interesting, and I can see that you're becoming quite the leader in that area. Max, what do you see for the clubs in the next decade?
I think we have a continued opportunity to keep addressing the needs of the community, to keep addressing the needs of youth. I think one of the most important things us as a Boys and Girls Club can stay on the forefront of what is happening to our youth. What are the outcomes? What are the new trends? What's happening to our youth? And how can we ensure that what's happening is the most positive thing possible? And if there are negative outcomes happening, we need to make sure that we are the first at the line to catch that and address that. And I did make some notes for this, so I'll kind of peer down real quick. But I mean, overall, I just think Boys and Girls Club just become more and more wraparound. We're so unique in that, our mission is, it's very focused, yet it allows us to operate at a very, very wide scale. Like, we can do mental health, but we can also do sports leagues. We can do cooking classes, but we can also do leadership courses. We can also do community program collaborations, partnerships. Really, the Boys and Girls Clubs in my opinion, are an organization that can really do just about anything that it takes to address the needs of youth in our communities. So I think what's really important for Boys and Girls Clubs for the next decade is ensuring that we are just staying on the forefront of what's happening to our youth so that we can address it appropriately. Because, Washington County compared to Milwaukee County compared to, the Chippewa Valley Boys and Girls Clubs, like we're just operating in different places. But the way we approach how we operate, I think, needs to be the same, and that's making sure that we are just on that forefront. But I think we're going to continue just to address the needs of youth. I think we've been doing leadership and character development for some time, but I think the need to address that is even more stronger than ever. I think that need to address social emotional health is stronger than ever, because I think if we can handle those two things at a very, very high level, personally, I think if you are a very strong person at leading your own life and you have a strong character and will to do the best for yourself, you're going to become more mentally strong. I think you're going to become more physically healthy. And I think you're just going to become a more productive person no matter where you're at. So I think as long as the Boys and Girls Clubs stick in the next 10 years to that mentality and their approach, whatever issues come up within our youth, we're going to address them.
Well, you're saying the idea of leadership under those four buckets of operations, board, fund, and community engagement. If you think about it, many of the things you're talking about is if you listen to the community,
yeah,
that you'll do the right thing for and with that community.
Yep.
And that's really the basis of community engagement. And I want to go back to something you said early on about that young person, the young man that you said that you saw something in him where you saw the potential, but yet it was buried deep down. It really is testament to understanding people and understanding the community structure and how to support that structure, as well as to be able to have the community set goals for itself and for the citizens of that community, and to be a part of that.
Oh yeah, when you become integrated into the community, you start to understand not only how important it is to immerse yourself in the community, but into each individual person that comes into your club. I think that idea of being able to immerse myself into that individual's life came from the desire of wishing I had somebody like that as my own. But again, whether it be an individual, but individuals make the community makes up the greater area. You need to focus again on yourself first and foremost, because you can't work with other people and support other people unless you're doing that. Once you do that, you focus on individuals, you immerse yourself there where it's appropriate, you immerse yourself into the community like you mentioned. And I think I just looked down at my notes, that was one thing in the next 10 years is the Boys and Girls Clubs needs to be immersed. They need to be the community. They need to reflect the community in every capacity that they can. And if they can't, they need to find somebody that can help support them to do that.
So Max, promise me this, that when you become the CEO of the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, that you'll come back on the show. You'll do that for me?
No question. It'll be the first podcast I'm on.
Well, this is awesome. Max, anything else you want to share with us?
There's nothing I think that stands out, but I think what's important is that just we as a community continue to learn and understand one another. But I'll always go back to, I think it's important that everyone takes a second to sit back and really think about their life, where they're at, where they're heading, where they want to be, and really take a measure of, am I leading myself? Am I taking ownership for my life? Am I taking responsibility for my actions? And am I learning from not only my successes, but am I learning from my failures? And I think if we can get more and more people to just be more confident in themselves, self-love, self-care, self-discipline, self-leadership, if we can get more and more individuals focused on these aspects in just their day-to-day personal practice, the effects that will have on our community, I think would be absolutely beautiful to see. But I think it's also important, I kind of said it before, that we just continue to listen and understand to one another, because the nature of our community is sometimes is hard to see, especially for me as someone that wants so much good for the kids of tomorrow. When I see adults, tearing each other apart, and it's really difficult to watch. But I think if individuals take a moment to really assess themselves, we'll be in a better place. And when they start making the right steps to improve themselves, that trickles into them improving, whether it be their situation with their spouse, their situation with their children, their situation with their job, their coworkers, their friends, their family. And I think there's a powerful movement that comes from just self-leadership and all those different things I talked about. So I think I'll end it there. I think it's just love yourself, and you'll learn to love the community. And I think we're going to get to a better place if we do it that way.
Max, it has really been a joy seeing you develop over the years that I've known you, in your leadership. I'm learning a lot from you here that I can apply in my own life. So on behalf of our listeners and myself, this idea of these four buckets, if you will, around leadership is something that I'm going to use in some of the work that I do. Max Roy of the Boys and Girls Club, thank you for joining us today on Days of Learning podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Wow, that was quite an interview. What an amazing individual who has it so together. He talked about his early childhood, growing up in a small town, tight-knit community that didn't necessarily have all the answers, but it instilled something into him about this idea of support. And some early support for Max came from his brother, who taught him about weightlifting. And that stayed with him. He noticed in himself as well, being a child with obesity, that he had some self-confidence issues. On the outside, he was saying, people were saying that they liked him, the teachers liked him, but inside something was not quite there. He spoke of self-confidence, and all too frequently in youth in America and in this area, bullying that happens in all areas, in education, in after-school programming. But he kept talking about leadership and giving and receiving support. How do you lead yourself is how you're going to lead others. I was really taken by the four aspects of leadership that he mentioned: the idea of operations, board development, resource development, and community engagement. Getting to know the community to support the community regardless of their needs. And I think when you think about it, whether it be for health, physical health or mental health or spiritual health, that if you know the community, it will be a natural extension to be able to support the community in the issues that they are talking about. I hope you've enjoyed this show as much as I have. Please send us some comments. And until next time, I'm your host, David Nelson. This is the Days of Learning podcast. Good day, good health, and be well. God bless.